Welcome back. This is going to be, we're not going over the full purchase and sale agreement on this video, but this video is going to show you some things that I see on a daily basis that would cause you to make sure that you get an amendment. Um, First off, seller. You need to check that the seller on line 4, the seller's name matches the seller's name in the tax documents. Sometimes they'll put an LLC. I'll have a video going over LLCs and what you need, but sometimes they'll only have one seller and there might be two sellers that are listed in the tax records. One of them may have died, they may have gotten divorced, and one party is able to sell, but that's something that you need to check on to make sure that it matches. Make sure that the PIN number matches on line 10 and 9 and 10. Make sure that the PIN number matches the PIN number that your buyer thinks that they're buying. Items that will remain on the property and shall not remain on the property, even if it is listed, even if something is listed in MLS. Let's say in MLS it says outdoor shed, but the shed, you didn't look, but the shed is just on some 2x4s and it's not attached and there's not a foundation and it was not in the contract, that seller can take it. So make sure that items that remain with the property are on here and not just refrigerator, um, you know, things that are not um, connected to the home. Make sure that you Samsung refrigerator model this that was in showing on this date, or just anything not secured down that they want. You make sure that you put it in here. If it's not in writing, it might not stay unless it is secured to the house, as you know, what is private personal property and what is um, property that belongs to the house. So make sure that's in there. Items that shall not remain. There may be some things that you see that, there's a car that's in the driveway that you can tell has not been moved in 10 years. Make sure that you put that there. Like all junk is taken away. I wouldn't say junk, but car and driveway to be removed, all personal property to be removed. Um, I would put that in there. Fuel. So this is something, if they have a propane tank, so in Sevierville, in some of the rural areas that we have here in Tennessee, you will see that a seller will have their heating by propane tank. And so that is oftentimes a leased propane tank, and you'll want to make sure that you add that in there if you see a propane tank. Add it in there that it stays or it goes. And, is the seller getting the rest of the fuel? If not, um, you know, this is something that how much fuel is left, how much is it worth? I've seen closings um, have to be extended sometimes because they didn't factor in that there's a full tank of propane that somebody needs to pay for. So make sure if there's a leased item like a propane tank, security systems, whatever, that does your buyer want them? If not, make sure that they are in here or you're going to have to make an amendment. Purchase price, we're not going to go over that. Let's say you start out with a conventional loan, but then your buyer is offered, your lender says, wait a minute, we can get you an FHA with a lot less money down. It's a great whatever. You just happen to change financing types. You're going to need an amendment or put it on the notification. Even if it goes from cash to financing or from financing to cash, conventional FHA, whatever the change is, you're going to want to put that into a notification that they're changing because the seller doesn't have to agree to that. And it was agreed that you're getting a conventional loan. And if you're changing to an FHA, which might take longer, you also need to get agreement by the seller to change that. If you change lenders, let's say it's just even the day after you go, you've given the listing agent your pre-approval, you've given them the contract that says we're getting conventional loan, and the day after, 2 days later, you get a better rate with another lender. You need to let the seller's agent and the seller know that we've changed lenders. And the way that you do that is through the notification form. Um, and so that is a good way to relay any type of change. So change of loan, definitely you're going to need an amendment for that, or put it on a notification. Loan obligations. Let's say within 3 days you have not made the application for a loan, you're going to need to amend, or the appraisal hasn't been ordered, you're going to want to send an amendment extending that period of time so that you stay within compliance of the contract. Let's say you checked on the first contract, this agreement on line 106, this agreement is contingent on the appraised value. And then the lender comes back and he says, hey, you're giving so much of a down payment, we're really not going to need an appraisal. You're going to want to make sure that that contingency is taken away, and by either a notification or by an amendment. A lot of times the lender will ask you to do an amendment if you're no longer needing the appraisal, and the title company will want that amendment because they're waiting on the appraisal to come in to schedule closing. And if you don't need it, then they can take that contingency away and things can happen a little bit sooner. So there is a part on the notification form that says, and all you do is click it, that says, um, we no longer need an appraisal, and it's easier than doing an amendment. Closing expenses, title expenses. Here's one that I oftentimes see an amendment that's needed. Closing agency for buyer and contact information. A lot of times a buyer's agent will not put a closing agency for both lines here, and you need to. Even if so lines 58, closing agency for buyer. Line 160, closing agency for seller. If you're writing an offer, fill both of those in, because if one of those is left blank, just because, to be determined, or you don't know who the seller wants to close with, it doesn't matter. If you leave it blank, you're going to need an amendment no matter anyway. So put whoever you want to close with on both of those lines just to begin with. And if the seller wants to close with a different title company, you already have to do an amendment anyway, because if you left it blank, you got an amendment. So put put where you want to close on both of those lines first off. Unless, let's say in the agent remarks on MLS, it says seller would like to close at so and so title company, then you already know where the seller wants to close, and you would put that where the seller wants to close. Earnest money, trust money. Make sure you put within however many days your buyer can get it to wherever the earnest money is being held. Otherwise, if you put 3 days because the offer looks better, we're gonna, give you $10,000 earnest money in 3 days, but there's a holiday and you can't possibly get it, wire it there in 3 days, because the banks are closed, you're going to need an amendment. So make sure you are checking on when your buyer can deliver that earnest money, if there's any holidays or weekends, to account for. Otherwise, you're going to need an amendment. Also, if you don't put the name of the holder or the address, you'll need an amendment to correct that. Going down, the closing date. If you put the closing date is on a weekend or on a day that the title company is closed, you're going to need an amendment. If you put in there on or before, you're going to need an amendment because you want a solid closing date, not on or before. And I will have a video on that to tell you why. If your possession changes, let's say the sellers have already moved out, your buyers have asked for possession of the garage just to store some things in the day before closing, you will need a closing date amendment for that. Don't allow your buyer to move anything in, even if it's to the garage, or as a seller's agent, allow anything to happen with a buyer moving in, especially, or moving anything in to property without it being in writing. So you would use a closing date occupancy agreement amendment for that. There's an occupancy agreement for seller and there's an occupancy agreement for buyer. We'll go over both of those in a separate video. Special assessments, really don't see. The deed, usually title handles all the deed work. So if you put the deed is going to be in so-and-so's name and then they change it, a lot of times the title company will ask you to make an amendment. Usually what I see is on line 258, it says deed to be determined by buyer or as requested by buyer. And so you don't really need to amend that if it's worded that way. The title company will do everything. Lead-based paint disclosure. I hope you saw their lead-based paint disclosure video. Does apply or does not apply. This is kind of for you to make sure that you're checking your own work. Is this house built before 1978? If it does, then it does apply, and you will need to have that a lead-based paint disclosure accompany this offer, and it should have been given to you on the MLS or by the listing agent. Buyer's inspection. A lot of times if you put it 3 days and you can't get an inspector there, it's going to have to be amended. So just know, give yourself enough days to get an inspector out there. Resolution period. I see that having to be amended oftentimes because if you're not coming to any agreements and negotiations and you don't want to be out of contract, see my resolution video. I will have one just on inspections and resolution period and when you need amendments. Waiver of all inspections, final inspection. I don't really see a lot of places where amendments are needed. For special stipulations. If you put in there that the special stipulation is that the buyer has a home to sell, so you have a contingency to get the buyer's home under contract within 15 days, within 21 days, and it doesn't go under contract, you're going to need to amend that special stipulation. If you have a special stipulation that the seller provide all HOA documents within 24 hours and it's 23 hours and you don't have those, you want to amend that so you're not out of contract. Anything on special stipulations where the stipulation or contingency has been met, okay, let's say the contingency is buyer to get a survey done, an acceptable survey done, and then you get the survey and it is acceptable, you want to amend by taking that contingency away. Contingency to have an acceptable survey is satisfied, but you do need to follow up this contract with anything that changes or anything that has been satisfied by taking it away with an amendment, which is the RF 653. All of this. So down here, you wouldn't really amend anything that's there. So for this, it says informational purposes only. And the reason that it says that is because after the fact, after it's been countered, after it's been accepted, after it's been bound, you can go back and you can add information. Um, you can add that without changing the contract. And that's why it says for informational purposes only. It's not changing the contracts where you would need to get initials. You can go in and add all of that information so that the title company has it, or your company has it, without fault on your own. So that is things that would cause an amendment on a purchase and sale.